New filings unsealed in the Florida classified documents case, and Jack Smith is unhappy about that. Why? Because his prosecutor, the 5'2" Jay Bratt, evidently, as we thought, was threatening defense lawyers, saying if your client doesn't cooperate with us, not only are bad things going to happen to your client, which is a problem, but you, Mr. Lawyer, you who are representing this defendant, you may not get that judgeship that you want so bad here in Washington, D.C. if I have anything to say about it. So threatening a defense lawyer is unethical misconduct. Some people might say obstruction of justice, maybe. Prosecutorial misconduct, maybe a crime in and of itself. And so Trump's defense has been raising this for some time now, and we've seen the smoke surrounding the allegation about this misconduct. But now the motion that alleges it in detail has been unsealed. Thank you, Judge Cannon. Judge Cannon, on April 22nd, issued this order, says, all right, well, here's where we're at now. From the docket, in light of the representations made in Jack Smith's third motion for redactions, right? I've been fighting this for ages. He doesn't want us to see even the allegations, and noting the absence of any defense objection. So Trump says, okay, well, we've got the redactions all cleared up. That's all taken care of. The clerk is directed to unseal. Whoo! These are ECF numbers, so court record numbers, 101, 115, 116, 118. And when we're looking through these, we go, whoa, 101. That's like early. It was like a long time ago. We're in the 400s now. So that's early on in the case, signed by Judge Cannon. And what is that? Well, it's a very early motion that was filed on June 4th, 2023. June 4th, 2023 was before a lot of stuff had happened. So we rewind the clock a little bit. Remember that Trump leaves office January 2021. FBI opens up their investigation March 30th, 2022. Grand jury investigation starts April 26, 2022. We're still in the 22s now. And the grand jury has been going on forever. Okay, we fast forward, and Trump is not indicted until a year later, right? So grand jury, we know the FBI is poking around. Grand jury is cobbling together a bunch of materials to try to go investigate Trump and indict him eventually. But they're also using the power of the grand jury to go investigate everything, right? They're subpoenaing his lawyers and breaking attorney-client privilege. And they were doing a lot of this operating out of D.C., knowing that they were going to bring charges later in Florida. So the whole thing was corrupt, and they were just letting it go on for a long time. Why? So that nobody could see what was happening. Grand jury investigations all happen under the dark of night. They're all behind closed doors. They're sealed. Normally, we don't get anything about them. So of course, Jack Smith wants that, right? He can do whatever he wants under the power of the grand jury in D.C. They'll give him power to do anything. Okay, so grand jury starts, and I'm trying to draw a timeline here so we can see why Trump is complaining about this. So 2022 is when the grand jury starts their work. Trump files this motion, as we're going to see, June 4th, 2023. So about 14 months later, he says, all right, look, enough of this. I need to see what's going on in this case because you haven't charged me yet. Then we fast forward, they turn around and they indict him. So that was the Florida indictment. Right. And there was a raid and other things. So let's take a look now at what this filing says. So this has all been unsealed from Judge Cannon, thankfully, bringing this to our attention. You see, it was originally sealed, right? Sealed. And Trump's team has been saying, we have been filing for relief because of misconduct from the DOJ. Now, they brought in Jack Smith, and they said Jack Smith was this independent special counsel, and he was going to do his own independent analysis. And it's not Joe Biden prosecuting Donald Trump. It's not Merrick Garland at all. No, it's Jack Smith. He's a special counsel. He's independent. We kept saying that he's not an independent counsel. Okay, that was dissolved thanks to Congress. So this is somebody who is subject, unless this is a new position, in which case he's not lawful because Congress didn't create this new position, then he is subject to Merrick Garland, right? Which means Merrick Garland's subject to Joe Biden. So it is Joe Biden. Okay. So they have been raising this stink for a long time. Now, this hit the Florida docket August 11th. So you're going to see this August 11th date, but I want to ignore that for a minute because this is an attachment. It's an addendum. And this was actually submitted by James Trusty right here, June 4th, 2023. So before a lot of this stuff actually started to materialize, he's saying, you guys have just been dragging your feet on this for a while. Trump's team has been pursuing this. So here's the background. Filed under seal in the District of Columbia and talking about all of the misconduct from Jack Smith and preceding Jack Smith, the other prosecutors who were working on the case, because basically they just got their briefcases and walked over from the DOJ's office over into the special counsel's office, just picked it up and moved. So Trump's team was saying, all right, listen, we moved this court to disclose transcripts of grand jury testimony of all these people, Margot Martin, Chamberlain Harris, and minutes and other items. They say it's widely recognized that the proper functioning of our grand jury processes function because of secrecy, and there is a tradition of secrecy because the secrecy is endeavored to create impartiality of that body, right? If you don't want a bunch of influences moving the grand jury, which is why we keep it secret, so that they're kind of beyond reach. But what happens if the prosecutor who's presenting to the grand jury is a corrupt partisan hack? So it follows that when the grand jury ceases to function as an impartial body, and instead it serves as an overarching, reaching arm of a biased and zealous prosecutor, then the need for the secrecy of this grand jury needs to end. It must yield to preserve the constitutional sanctity of the institution. Now, the Supreme Court has explicitly recognized that the invocation of the grand jury secrecy is not some talisman that dissolves all constitutional protections, like because it's a secret grand jury, you can do whatever you want in there, saying there are limitations. And President Trump says the defense, like all other citizens, is constitutionally entitled to an unbiased grand jury. This is a fundamental protection that stems from the recognition that there is a potential for abuse in these proceedings. They're secret. They're ex parte, meaning the defense is not involved, and they're largely under control of the prosecutors. And so even though the grand jury belongs to no branch of the government, the prosecutor exerts significant influence over this. And in exerting this influence, they still may not circumvent their independence by creating conduct that deprives the jury of their judgment. Now, the grand jury and their investigation of the classified documents and other presidential records, we're transitioning to this case now, that were stored at Trump's residence in Mar-a-Lago, this panel of people and this prosecutor has led to a process that has been infected by prosecutorial misconduct and bias. Saying from the inception of its investigation, the DOJ and subsequently the Office of the Special Counsel, because Jay Bratt just picked up his briefcase and his step stool and walked over, have abandoned the professional cooperation and the courtesies typically employed by prosecutors and the defense counsel, and instead have exacerbated the adversarial nature of the proceedings to deprive Trump of his due process. Now, by way of example, President Trump has reason to believe that Jack Smith's lawyers, have made inappropriate and unethical comments in the presence of the grand jury that nobody can see, pressured witnesses to waive their right, implied culpability upon the rightful invocation of testimonial privileges. People say, I invoke my right to remain silent. And he says, you would invoke your right to remain silent, wouldn't you? Yeah, just that's what criminals do, isn't it? Very interesting. Saying that the grand jury also insinuated to an attorney, this is the one with Nauta's attorney, insinuated to a lawyer that he would increase his odds of a judicial appointment if he pressured his client to cooperate with Jack Smith. See how that goes in DC? You want to be a judge, don't you? Why don't you throw your client right over the bridge? Have fun. Oh, sure, yeah, I'd love to be a judge. Bye, client. I mean, shout out to this attorney, man, and his honesty and commitment to his client. Defense attorneys are pretty amazing, just saying. So you want to be a judge, don't you? Well, why don't you just make him plead guilty and make up lies about Trump? He said, get the hell out of here, okay? Brat punk. Also, refused to accommodate well-founded requests for brief delays in grand jury proceedings and regularly employed tactics designed to minimize the ability of clients to meaningfully prepare for their testimony with the counsel of their choice. Now, Trump anticipates that he will pursue relief from this court regarding the OSC's abuse of the grand jury process, and to enable him to do so with a fuller record and to prevent injustice, we request that the court order the disclosure of the requested grand jury materials. The undersigned counsel have no objection to any restrictions that you want to maintaining the secrecy of the transcripts. So here's some background. They say in or about May of 2022, the DOJ impaneled a grand jury to investigate matters related to Trump's documents. And since then, following Garland's appointment of deranged Jack, numerous witnesses have been subpoenaed to testify before the grand jury. And they went after everybody. Employees of the Trump organization, former Pence people, former White House staffers. They went after Secret Service agents. They went after Mar-a-Lago, groundskeepers, maids. They went after the maids at Mar-a-Lago. They went after at least 4 of President Trump's attorneys. These people are maniacs. This was a duly elected president who left office and has lawful authority to the documents as the president. And they were trying to turn and flip maids. People are sick. Now, from its inception, says Trump's defense, this investigation has been tainted by prosecutorial misconduct. On August 24th, attorney attorney Stanley Woodward, August 24th, who represents Walt Nauta, met with Jay Bratt, one of the lead prosecutors in this matter at the DOJ. Lawyer goes to meet with the prosecutor. Very common, happens all the time. This was the first time that Mr. Woodward had ever met with Mr. Bratt, but upon Mr. Woodward's arrival at Main Justice, he was led to a conference room where Mr. Bratt awaited what appeared to be a folder containing information about Mr. Woodward. Oh, nice to have you here. You're talking about your client. Well, I happen to have this file about you. Nice of you to be here. Mr. Bratt thereupon told Mr. Woodward, the government prosecutor told the defense lawyer, he said, I didn't consider you to be a, quote, Trump lawyer. He said, I was unaware. He says, actually, I was made aware, I don't know how Bratt said this, that you had been recommended to Joe Biden for an appointment, wow, to the Superior Court for D.C. Wow. So someone recommended you to Joe. But Bratt followed up with the words to the effect of, I wouldn't want you to do anything to mess that up, That position's a pretty nice position. Superior Court Judge Joe Biden, yeah, he has to take a look at those. And it would be a real shame if your client didn't cooperate and you messed that up. What a shame. Now, therefore, Mr. Bratt told the defense attorney, said, one way or another, your client is going to be giving up his lavish lifestyle. No more private planes or golf clubs for him, man. And he encouraged Mr. Woodward to persuade Mr. Nauta to cooperate. He said, you better get in there and you better tell your client to cooperate with us or you're not going to be a judge. And Stanley's like, what are you talking about, dude? Relax. To cooperate with the government's investigation. And this was prior to the appointment of Jack Smith. So Mr. Woodward, they say, this is ridiculous. This guy's been a long-standing, extremely professional, upstanding officer of this court. And Mr. Bragg's statement that there was a suggested quid pro quo, or even a threat intended to cause Mr. Woodward to persuade his client to cooperate with Mr. Bratt is offensive. In other words, what we heard is play ball, Stanley, or you have no chance of becoming a judge, not in my jurisdiction. Now, under such circumstances, it is appropriate for the court to ease the secrecy protections that are typically afforded in these cases, so we can determine if similar egregious behavior has made its way into this unprecedented investigation, particularly regarding the testimony of Mr. Nauta. Now, further troubling gamesmanship, this is Trump's defense team, continued behind closed doors of the grand jury room after the appointment of Jack Smith, created with Attorney General Garland's appointment of Jack Smith in November of 2022. Let's talk about some examples of this. During grand jury testimony of Tim Parlatore, who is a former Trump attorney, one of President Trump's attorneys, no longer, was an order to show cause prosecutor. I'm sorry, that is not OS, that's old programming kicking in there. The Office of Special Counsel prosecutor repeatedly attempted to force Mr. Parlatore into disclosing information protected from disclosure by attorney-client privilege, right? So he's a lawyer. He says, I can't tell you that. That's protected by attorney-client privilege. He says, no, it's not. No fewer than 45 times did Jay Bratt, did his prosecutor, did they ask questions of Mr. Parlatore about his communications with Trump? 45 times. Now, with those other members of the legal team, it didn't work. And the team's legal strategy and work product, they wanted information about this. Now, each time Mr. Parlatore invoked privilege on behalf of Trump, Bratt followed up by implying that he was refusing to tell the grand jury what he had a right to know. Okay, so all these jurors are sitting there. Think of it like a courtroom. It's like a trial happening. Tim Parlatore is up on the bench asking him questions. So what did Trump say to you when you said this? Or what did Trump say about that? What did you say to him? Oh, I'm sorry, I can't talk about that. That's attorney-client privilege. I'm sorry, Mr. Government. That's attorney-client privilege. He's a lawyer and a pretty good one. So he's invoking and he knows what he needs to do. And so Jay Bratt turns around, comments on this to the jurors. So you're not answering. You're not going to provide any testimony to the grand jury about why other locations, you're not going to tell them why the storage units and Trump Tower and the Flagler office were not searched. So you're not going to give it to them, what they're here, what they have a right to know. Oh, so you're a bad guy, right? Kind of beating them up in front of the grand jury. During one exchange in which Mr. Parlatore refused to answer a question on privilege grounds, the government loser prosecutor said, if the former president's so cooperative, well, why hasn't he allowed you, Tim, Mr. Parlatore, to share his conversations with the grand jury today? If he's so innocent and cooperative, like it's so reprehensible. Where is the presumption of innocence? He knows better than this, right? He's a government prosecutor. This is absolute misconduct. The fact that this is, it wasn't laughed out of here is just ridiculous. This implied that if Trump had nothing to hide, Mr. Parlatore should willingly waive his client's constitutional rights. So a government prosecutor is basically demanding that another defense lawyer or another lawyer for Trump defending Trump against this crap, if he does his job that he has sworn an oath to do, that his whole license relies on, to his clients, that is an implication of Trump's guilt. Oh, so he has something to hide. He's not being cooperative. You're hiding the ball from these nice grand jurors here today. On a number of occasions, Jack Smith's lawyers have been abusive in their treatment of witnesses who also appeared before the grand jury, particularly those who were current or former employees of Trump or the Trump organization. Man, if they were mean to the maids, I'm gonna lose it here. They abuse them. Oh, big problems. The Department of Justice and the special counsel have continuously manufactured a false sense of urgency, compelling witnesses to appear and testify on an unreasonably expedited basis. You better be here tomorrow, 1 or 2 days notice. And Jack's attorneys have rebuffed the defense counsel's request to delay witnesses' appearances, regardless of various circumstances. So for one example, this prosecutor called Brett Reynolds, he balked at delaying the grand jury appearances of several witnesses that Stanley Woodward represented. And guess what? Mr. Woodward suffered a compound fracture in a motor vehicle accident days prior to the witness's scheduled appearance. Okay, Stanley Woodward, who doesn't get bribed off by Jay Bratt, and Jay Bratt tried to get him to turn his client into him, basically. Woodward goes out and gets into a car accident, says, I have a compound fracture, which is a pretty serious one. I think that means you got bone popping out. Is that right? Rather than accommodate Mr. Woodward's request for a brief extension of time, Mr. Reynolds callously asked him, oh yeah, your bone's popping out of your leg. Yeah, right. What are you going to come up with next week? Now, as this court's aware, Mr. Woodward has had to seek relief from this court with scheduling witnesses' appearances. Yeah. Put some duct tape on it, okay? Get your butt in here. This is about Trump. We don't care. Represented witness Chamberlain Harris, a young assistant administrator at Mar-a-Lago, sounds like a nice person, turned over a laptop to Jack Smith, but declined upon advice of counsel to give her computer password since the laptop belonged to her employer. Okay, so Chamberlain, she is now getting a subpoena and she gives him the laptop, doesn't give them the password, but rather than engage in communications with the lawyer or to get a search warrant because it's not her laptop, Jack Smith's attorney told Miss Harris, who lives in Florida, that if you don't turn over the password voluntarily, we're going to be compelled to provide it to the grand jury. You're going to be compelled to provide it to the grand jury in Washington, D.C. So give us the password or you're coming to Washington and you're going to do that in person within 48 hours notice and you're going to tell it to the grand jurors under a judge's gavel. So Miss Chamberlain, recognizing the futility of her situation, she's represented by a lawyer. It sounds like they went around the lawyer, acquiesced to the ultimatum, turned over the password. Nice people. Jack Smith's office also forced Trump's aide, Margot Martin, a Florida resident, to appear in Washington with only 72 hours notice. They refused to delay Miss Martin's appearance, to allow her to retain newly retained counsel, even have sufficient time to consult with her new lawyer before the appearance. Also, this guy, Carlos de Oliveira, who's ultimately been charged, was also represented by John Irving, and Irving agreed to image the cell phone and give it over to the special counsel. Now, despite that agreement, Jack Smith's thugs showed up at de Oliveira's home. They had a seizure warrant. They took the cell phone. So lawyers are acting in good faith. Prosecutors just show up like thugs, literally, and just take the property. Even after the seizure, Jack Smith's attorneys demanded that Mr. Irving provide them with the results of his privately conducted forensic analysis. Absolute maniacs. Now, the grand jury investigation, they say, has, at the time of this filing, lasted a year. They're getting tired of it. Numerous witnesses have been compelled to testify. It's unclear how much longer the investigation, how many more witnesses are going to be compelled to appear. And it is against this troubling backdrop that we want to see what is inside these materials. We need to get inside this because there are numerous instances of prosecutorial misconduct, and we need to know whether we're filing additional motions to address this. Here, Trump offers numerous concrete allegations of prosecutorial misconduct here. They pressured Tim Parlatore to give privileged information before the grand jury. They said that him not doing that means Trump's guilty. They forced a password out of a woman or else she had to come and testify. This dude breaks a bone with a compound fracture. What are you going to come up with next week, Stanley? Break your other leg? They're continuously making claims that attorneys are conflicted, but never put it on the record. Gave this woman, Margot, only 72 hours to show up, seized this guy's cell phone, and forced Mr. Woodward's, or pressured him to force his client to flip or else he'll lose his judgeship. Sick people. So these snapshots demonstrate an alarming pattern of behavior by the department and Jack Smith. Now, of particular concern is the risk that these vignettes are forming only only the mere tip of the iceberg on this story. As of now, undersigned counsel has only been provided with one grand jury transcript, just one, the one that memorializes the questioning of Tim Parlatore. So even in the absence of additional transcripts, a disturbing pattern has become clear here. Perhaps because of the high value of the target, Jack Smith tries to drive a wedge between the witnesses and their lawyers. So given its pattern of abuse, we think it's likely that they're going to continue to do this. And we need great disclosure about all this. They don't need secrecy. The need for secrecy has been brought up before. In fact, we talked about it with Clinton. The court held that statements did not constitute a violation because it's already widespread public knowledge. And so it's similar to what happened with Clinton. A lot of this is public knowledge. And so the cat's out of the bag, okay? The information's no longer secret. So stop allowing them to bury this stuff. Saying Trump has good faith basis to believe that Jack Smith's attorneys have engaged in prosecutorial misconduct throughout their investigation. And our evidence supports that. And so Trump will maintain the materials, saying Trump has demonstrated multiple problems. If you don't give us these materials, we're not going to be able to show that there was misconduct here. So give them to us. Accordingly, Trump requests that this court order that Jack Smith and the DOJ disclose the transcripts. Signed by James Trusty, June 4th, 2023, before the indictment ultimately dropped. And of course, this was all under seal for a long time now, almost a full year. They didn't want us to see those allegations, right? Jack Smith doesn't want you to know that his little prosecutor, little Jay Bratt, is, bouncing around there in court trying to make Tim Parlatore into a liar for just doing his job, trying to make Tim Parlatore a co-conspirator for just invoking privilege that he's entitled to do. So these people are, as we see, monstrous, right? Doesn't matter if what you think of your opponent, if they have a compound fracture, that's a big problem. You give them a little bit of grace, okay? Sorry about that. Hopefully it heals quickly. You get back on your feet there, Stanley. No, they just mock them, okay? It shows this is not about justice. These are people with a vendetta. They have been targeting Trump from the very beginning. They tried to cover up their misdeeds, and now Judge Cannon is bringing it to our attention. And so tremendous news. We're grateful to Judge Cannon for continuing to seal these materials so that we can see the truth of what Jack Smith is doing there in Florida and elsewhere. If this is happening in Florida, it's the same story in the J6 case, and all of the other prosecutors like Bragg, Colangelo, Fannie are on the same template. So we're going to be here continuing to cover this and more, my friends. All the Trump litigation, this is the place to get it. We're going to, of course, ask you to subscribe. Very much appreciate that so that we don't miss you. Thanks for liking this video, for inviting a friend or family member to come over and join us. We got some great links down in the description below, including our members only community at watchingthewatchers.locals.com, where we do streams in the morning and after parties after our live streams, and we'll see you inside over on Locals and back here on the next one.